So let me start off with a few slides. If you have any comments, notes, then just add them in the chat and we'll address them right away. And actually at the end of the session, I don't think we'll use the full hour, but then we have an informal discussion. So feel free to tune in by chat or even by video and audio at the end. So you're all welcome to do so. So I think I just briefly announced them. So Gonzalo, JP, and myself will guide this session. So I'm community manager of the Things Network, also one of the organizers of this event. And one of the tasks that I will be working on after this conference is to make sure that we streamline the whole migration of devices and gateways to V3. So I know there are a lot of unclarities about that yet, but we can address a few things during this meeting, and I'll do so again after this conference will be one of my most main tasks. So yeah, the Things Network, short recap. I think when you ask different people, you get a different answer with the question, what is the Things Network exactly? And I think this also highly changes over time. So yeah, let me share with you some possible answers you might receive when asking this question. So I think first of all, it's a very large global public LoRaWAN network. So it comprises now about 20,000 gateways that are connected in all corners of the world. And this was really where we started off with, focusing on building this network together, realizing ubiquitous LoRaWAN connectivity. And we might discuss in a moment whether this is still really the focus that lives in the community, but that's something we can address. But yeah, for sure, network coverage is one of the main topics that we facilitate together with this global community. This global community now comprises of, I think, 140,000 developers. Of course, this is a big number. It's kind of the amount of people that have an account on our network server stack and are using or have been using our network server. Well, we run the LoRaWAN forum. I checked it. I think yesterday we had about 250 active users. I think that's a good indication of the activity within our forum. And actually, next to that, most of what we do is open source. And the open source project, the Things Stack, which is the latest LoRaWAN network server that we provide, has now over 14,000 commits, and actually is one of the biggest open source projects in the Netherlands as of this moment. And it all started, like I mentioned, with building this network. We all said, let's build this thing together. You're the network, and well, that leads us to this big number of 20,000 connected gateways. But yeah, when looking at the community and the speed of adding new gateways, I think there's been a shift from in the beginning, we just started building this network and we had a lot of discussions on the chicken and the egg. Do you first need to build the network, or do you start with realizing your application? Well, then we said in the beginning, all right, let's just start with building the network and use cases will come. So everyone around the globe actively started building networks, connecting gateways. But I think nowadays we now more or less leave this approach behind. And I don't see really a lot of people adding gateways just for the sake of extending the coverage, but rather people having some kind of use case in mind. It could be something in their home to automate or monitor things. It could be universities, could be enterprises that are kind of have an idea about the use case in mind, and for that specific purpose, they're setting up this network. So I think that's a bit of the trend that I'm seeing here. So I'm curious to hear a bit later from Gonzalo and JP if that's something that they see as well. But either way, like when you look at the Things Network and the amount of gateways, then it's really focused on the public community network. But of course, this is not the only thing that we run and that people within our community run, because we have a big open source community And there are many developers or companies that are running the stack themselves, either for testing purposes or because they want to have full control over the network by running the network server on premises or in their private environment. So we see something happening here as well. And at the other end of the spectrum, we also have a lot of networks provided by the Things Industries, which is kind of the commercial entity which provides the network with SLA and professional support. And actually, if you combine those three areas, then you would end up with 35 to 40,000 gateways that are connected to, I would say, this ecosystem. And if we talk about the Things Network, then I would rather talk about kind of this whole inclusion of different projects, companies, and not only people contributing gateways to the public community network. And that's one of the reasons also why we have developed Packet Broker. And Packet Broker is our implementation of LoRaWAN roaming that interconnects all of the different LoRaWAN networks. And it started off with connecting the different network servers that we run. So that's both the open source version, the public community network, and the private customers. And the overview of all our network server names and deployments, well, that's all what you can see here. So we have a lot of different names. I think the most important one to know is the community edition, which is the public community network. The ThingsTech Cloud, that is our main enterprise offering from the Things Industries. And we have the ThingsTech open source. And that's basically if you just download our GitHub repository, or you can even install it using Docker and run it. And that's basically your open source distribution. Well, all of them can be connected to the Packet Broker. And that would mean that if you run an open source deployment, that you can use the community, the gateways connected to the community cluster, but also the private entities that run the ThingsTech clouds, they can also use gateways from open source or from the public community network. And I think definitely when you look at the whole community network and the ecosystem, then I think we should aim at including all of those different deployments. And in a later phase, and that's something we're working on now, is to also include different network servers. So we're talking to ChirpStack, but also to Utility and to Evernet, kind of the bigger network server providers, to also kind of join this Packet Broker initiative. And that's not so difficult with the technology, because we fully follow the LoRaWAN specifications, but I think it's more of a discussion on politics and who's going to pay for what, and like these kind of conversations, but they are all taking place. So the ones that already have experience with the ThingsTech or latest network server, and they might see that here and there a gateway pops up in your metadata and has the name Packet Broker. And that means that the packet is arrived from a deployment that's not the one that you are actively using. And that would be identified as the gateway ID Packet Broker, which is actually will be replaced at some point as well by the actual gateway ID. And this leads us to one of the big topics that I'm not going to dive in now, but will come up later during this discussion, which is about migration. So I think for many, this interface looks very familiar to you, which is the interface of our outdated or from our old network server version. And eventually it should look something like this, which is the interface of the new, the ThingsStack, or the new LoRaWAN network server. So I already posted here the link. So if you haven't tried it out yet, well, feel free to visit this link, console.thethings.network, and can get started with this v3 deployment right away. So before we dive into this, give the word to Gonzalo. Let me first end my screen share. And so if you already have some questions, feel free to add them in the chat. And let's continue to you, Gonzalo.
Thank you. Yeah, from our side here in Switzerland, the core topic that is occupying our time these days is the migration and how to deal with it. Not long ago, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking to Andreas Spies, which you probably know from the videos. Is the guy with the Swiss accent. And he was telling me, like, he asked me, when is the migration going to start, or when do we have to migrate? Where is D3? And to me, it was kind of okay. It should be clear that it's already out there, and you have to migrate already now. But he was doing it as an exercise in putting himself on the side of the user, and he showed me go to the things network homepage, log in, try to go to the menu, and try to go to V3. It's nowhere there. Right? You go to the console link goes to V2. There are some warnings, but it's not really clear. So yeah, basically migration is raising a lot of questions. That's the main concern. And I was chatting with JP and Lawrence yesterday about which are the specific points in the migration that are of concerns for us. There are 4 subtopics that we currently focus on. One is the Swiss backend itself, which is one of the public clusters that was not run directly by TTN. The other one is the gateway migration, the node migration, which is the hardest part, or the one with the most open questions. And then the last topic is the community impact. Right? What's all the human in the loop that is affected by this migration?
I guess I have a few questions about your first topic. So you in Switzerland, you were running your own instance under a company name. How did that work, and why is it different with version 3? That's what I'm not sure about.
The Swiss cluster is run under a non-profit. So we have a non-profit association here that sort of operates the cluster in cooperation with a foundation here that provides internet to all academic institutions in the country. And yeah, the migration, the difference between V2 and V3 is in many regards during V2, since V2 was not completely open source, we had a lot of help from the TTN Amsterdam team to operate it. And now, and this is, I see this as a positive thing, there's a clear change in governance. So with version 3 being operated by TTI instead of the foundation, that makes it very clear that we need to take full control of all the details of the deployment. So,
but what I'm wondering, isn't it as simple as this is actually more question for Lawrence, because version 3 is completely open source, and you allow people running their own open source instance of this. Can a community, say the community, Cape Town community, can't we just run the open source version, tie in with the packet broker and say this is part of the things network? Or is it that simple, or is it
yeah, so I think this is really where this packet broker fits in, because we decided with the Things Industries that we would run the public clusters of the community edition of the Things Stack. But then you really only focus on the community edition, but you don't focus on the kind of grander network that all is part of this packet broker network. And what we can do is that as an entity or as a community, you can yourself run the thing stack. And you can do that based on the open source version. And then basically with this packet broker configuration, you can make that part of the grander community network. There's one thing to keep in mind here, and that is that for running a network, you need to have a specific net ID. And this net ID is basically it's officially given out by the LoRa Alliance, and that defines a range of unique device addresses. And we use the packet broker, but also basically all roaming implementations. They look at the device address to define what device is connected to what specific network. And this is something to discuss. So if you would set up something yourself, then there are different options. So either if you are a LoRa Alliance member, then you could go to the, basically you have your own device address block that you can configure to your specific network. And then you basically hook up this device address block to the packet broker. In case of ONIA, which is the Open Network Infrastructure Association, right, in Switzerland.
Yeah.
As far as I know, you're not part of the LoRa Alliance, so then you can basically use or license the subblock from the one that we use of the Things Network for that purpose. But basically, it's indeed that process where you hook up an additional cluster or an additional network and configure the packet broker in such a way that it routes the package in the right way.
So in the case of Switzerland, because we always use Zurich as the example for the rest of the world, is TTI going to run the version 3 instance, or is the Open Network Infrastructure Association going to run that instance with the help of TTI?
No, now it will be fully on our side. So,
so maybe to really go to the basics. So maybe you can explain a bit why you have this network and why you think it's important that you run it yourself.
there are many reasons. One is legal, data like jurisdiction, basically. Since Switzerland is not in the EU, data privacy changes if data stays in country versus if it goes to Amsterdam or if it goes to wherever the Azure servers are running. That's one thing. Then, well, there's a small technical aspect in just reducing latency if possible, if the servers are very close, which seemed perhaps a bit more important when the RX delay was 1 second, but now being 5 by default, maybe it's not that critical. There's also the sense of ownership that I would say it's rather prevalent in the local society, that it's considered as a positive thing that this is a bit more Swiss, let's say. It's a bit more like it's ours. Then there is also in terms of ownership, but more like data sovereignty. I don't know the word exactly. Like being in control of the data, because when we have in the association, we have people that have like legal backgrounds, right? And they say, look, imagine worst case scenario, in 5 years down the line, TTI is bought by Oracle, and then the Oracle CEO comes over and says, like, you all are screwed. I'm gonna just take what you did, and so it's a way of being in control of infrastructure, which is the purpose of the association.
here. So it's legal, it's partly ownership run by people in Switzerland, operated by people in Switzerland. And it's, I would say, maybe risk if it's really being used in such a stage that, well, you never know what's going to happen with the things industries in 5 years' time. So at least then, if you have everything, if you have full control over it yourself, then yeah, it's independent of what we're doing in the office, and that makes,
I
of
think
course, a lot of sense.
we should move on to the next topic, but I just want to quickly say what my opinion or viewpoint is here. I use the European. I've been using the European instance for the past 5 years from the beginning. And down here in South Africa, the latency is a big problem. So if we have a gateway on 3G, sometimes the downlink windows are missed. So it is a problem, a technical problem, but it is not a huge problem. So normally, if you miss the first RX window, the next time the spreading factor will rise, and the second RX window will be used, and the second RX window is fine, latency-wise. So for us, it's the easiest using the European instance. Because we don't have a big community like in Zurich. So we don't have that group of people that can maintain the instance. So we can maybe find a company that's willing to sponsor servers and we can run the instance, but that's all. It's always a short-term thing. So there always needs to be somebody that needs to maintain it, and that's a short-term thing. As soon as that person leaves, the thing falls apart. Then I rather trust the things industries to be that long-term player to maintain our servers. And then my other opinion here is using the Things network has always been, that's the proof of concept playground. So a US company, you can use the Things network, or US hobbyist can use the Things network. But if the Things network dies tomorrow, it shouldn't affect any business, because the business shouldn't really be using that. So from my startup company's perspective, we use the Things network to do our proof of concepts, but at some point, we move over to a private TTI version 3 cloud-hosted instance because that provides the SLA we need. So there isn't really a reason for us to run a Cape Town, South Africa instance of the version 3 stack. Yes, it will be nice having one here locally, but there isn't really a major reason to do that. And I think your biggest concern in Switzerland is the data sovereignty. You have ownership of the data. Here in South Africa, it's not the primary concern. It is a slight concern, but because the European GDPR is stricter than the South African version of the same law, it's fine having our data in Europe. So just a different perspective of the same matter.
Yeah. A short reply there, Gonzalo, before you go to the next topic.
I wanted to add something about, but it's mostly related about the culture. You know, Switzerland has a very long history of
definitely
dealing with European Union. So it's very idiosyncratic in a way, the situation.
Can I quickly just answer here one of the chat messages? I see Mark Stanley ask me a question here about version 3 support, a little bit back, TTN mapper, TTI version 3 cloud instances. I guess it's an important topic. I'll just quickly answer it. If there's time later, I'll elaborate more. The idea with TTN mapper is to be able to support multiple networks. Because version 2 is a different network than version 3, so we have to support multiple networks. That forces us to support multiple networks. And the idea would be, if you have a private instance of the Things stack, the integration for TTN mapper is there. You can enable it, and the data will go to TTN mapper. And the idea would be that every network becomes a separate layer on the map. And I have to add there, not all those layers will become public. We have to somehow fund the server resources. So likely what we'll do is the Things network itself will be the publicly available layer, and then private networks will somehow have to put behind a login so that only the network owner or users that he assigned can see the coverage of those networks, and maybe have some ability to share that publicly. and then maybe at a small fee. But that's all still theoretical. The major thing now is supporting multiple networks on the map, and that's not as simple as it seems, because when data arrives from the thing stack at TTN mapper, we need to identify the network. And the current JSON data doesn't say this data comes from this specific network instance. And it's something that we're discussing with the things industries. They are adding the net ID and the tenant ID and the cluster ID, and somehow we need to find a way to identify a dedicated network. But yeah, that's a quick update, quickly answering your question. Yes, it's going to be possible, but we'll have to see when.
Yeah, and I think this also provides a good introduction to the next topic. And I actually see there have been plenty of questions about that and comments on the gateway migration. So Gonzalo, as you are the, if it's inventor, a creator of the labs story, I think it is, that's on our website on how to create a gateway yourself using a Raspberry Pi and the IMST gateway card. So I think there are now hundreds, if not thousands, of gateways that implemented that reference design. So yeah, do you already have some thoughts or ideas on kind of what are the steps needed to get them over to the thing stack?
Yeah. So the plan for that, we are holding on recommending, as it was commented also in the by Neda and also many in the chat. We are holding the recommendation to migrate yet because that's a recommended option to keep the coverage alive.
So maybe to quickly to that, so the reason why we say, hey, like wait a bit before migrating your gateways, unless you kind of collaboratively decide with your local community to already go forward, is that we have packet broker in place from V2 to the thing stack. So that is working, but we don't have peering from the thing stack back to the V2 network. So once you migrate your gateways to the new environment, it doesn't route any data anymore for sensors that are still on this V2 environment.
Yeah. So the plan for that is the long-term plan is to update to basic station, right? So we will update the Raspberry Pi base installer to use basic station. We will also most likely update it to use the rack Raspberry Pi hat. That is just easier than the IMST one because it doesn't need any intermediate boards. But in between, we will try to point people at the right time when to reconfigure their gateways. There's also, there is this repository of remote configuration that you can, during the installer, you can select if you keep your config locally or remotely. And the remote option is just a gigantic GitHub repo that has all these gateway configurations that we manage. So we will keep an eye on that, and so we have that as a backup to push the migration at some point if we see that people are not migrating, because we could update the configuration. We can ping the owners of the gateways, but we can also force an updated migration.
I know that many also connected to Resin or to Balena, as it is called now. So I suppose you can use the same tool for flashing the gateway with basic station. Is that feasible, you think, Gonzalo?
Yeah, that will work. But we still need to keep support for the old one, for the existing.
Yeah, so on the Balena side, that it's quite easy already. It depends on which version people are running, but if they're running the version that Jacques Kersing and me worked on, that's using Jacques Kersing's NB packet forwarder. So that can quite easily just be configured to forward to both version 2 and version 3.
Yeah.
So you have the best of both worlds. Of course, you lose the duty cycle enforcement, but most gateways are anyway far below the duty cycle. So on the Balena side, it's quite easy to do already. You can forward to both, and then at some point just disable the version 2 forwarding, and flashing the basic station onto these Balena gateways is very easy as well, because there is a repository, I think, maintained by Balena themselves, which you can just deploy that to the same gateways.
Cool.
Maybe in practice, Gonzalo, do you already have an idea of when you want to invite people to start moving over their gateways? What are your thoughts in Switzerland?
It's a big open question. I think it's reflected in the chat. What was it, Remco, who said that migration has not really started yet.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, we see, like, from TTI side, the warning that it will be switched off at the end of the year, probably, V2. So there is a certain urgency from that point of view. I anyway think that we would only start suggesting migration after the summer, after the European summer, so somewhere around September or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think this earlier will make any sense.
Yeah, so maybe to come on there as well. So we have our next conference is about the Think Stack, which is happening on May 28th. And actually a big topic there is migration. And there we have very clear instructions on how to migrate devices, how to migrate gateways. And we really want to make that the starting point for using the Think Stack as default network server. As we're still seeing that some sensors are being added to the V2 environment, and like that should really stop after the next conference, May 28th.
I think one of the big issues there is a lot of manufacturers of devices. They still tell you, they provide tutorials how to configure your devices for version 2. And
indeed.
it's still
so yeah, there's a tremendous amount of content on the internet on how to add devices to V2. So actually we are reaching out to them one by one, supporting them on updating migration or updating documentation. So that's a lot of work that we're currently working on. But at least that's kind of the basic for start using V3. And indeed, for migrating gateways, it's okay to move that to, let's say, the next quarter. So there will be then somewhere after summer. So we'll still draft the recommended migration path for gateways. And this is also really something to get in touch with your local community and discuss the best scenario. So I just read with the message from Mark Stanley. So also the municipality in Reading, they actually have quite a big deployment, and only the community, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole idea of this municipality deployment is that the community is able to use it. And it also means that, and then of course you have a solid case with moving to V3 much faster, because then the community can benefit from all of these gateways. So this is also really a case per community. And to get it to reply to the message from Jacques, so V2 becomes read-only at some stage, and that will happen after the conference on May 28th. And this will happen for applications and devices in the first place, but basically also for gateways. Still, this also directly happens on May 20, or like directly after this conference. So then it would start on June 1st. So that's something that we can still discuss, but for sure on application and device level. I think back to the topic, I think Gonzalo, you still had a few thoughts on the device migration. There's still some uncertainties you're seeing in the community itself. So maybe you want to address that topic.
Yeah, the node migration is the biggest concern right now. I personally took it kind of as slow as possible, because I know that you guys in Amsterdam are working hard on making this better. So it's an ongoing an evolving situation. But a lot of people are very confused about what needs to be done. There are so many, there are multiple scenarios, are very different. There's a lot of issues with the effort that is required to migrate is quite high for some. It's effort that people are perhaps not even willing to put in. There's I believe the large majority of the examples that were the example code that was and is still out there doesn't support rejoining, automatic rejoining of nodes. So devices will not migrate automatically for most maker projects. And they need to be physically power cycled, which is a huge issue. AVP devices, although this is clear that they've been not recommended since the beginning, and this was a very good idea, but still there's a lot of projects out there that are AVP, and they have the address, the device address flashed in there. People probably don't have these sketches anymore. They cannot even rebuild the application, so it's very complicated. And this sort of also takes me to the other point that I had. So the last one is V3 or the thing stack. It's increasingly more professional, which is great on one hand, but it's also harder for people to get into it. Harder for new people to get into it. One of the wonders of TTN v1 even was that you could start sending data without knowing almost anything. So it was almost plug and play. It was marvelous. V3 or link stack, to register a device, you need to know the exact version of the LoRaWAN stack that you have. And here, like, kudos to the team in Amsterdam, because the documentation is getting better and better, and there's a lot of recommendations in there. So it's pretty clear what you need to select, but it's still a bit overwhelming for a newcomer to enter the registration screen and see so many options, like selecting if you have the SF9 or 12 for receiving, and there's a lot of tweaking that can be done, and it's very much exposed, right? It's not so much as advanced settings. Some of these things are in advanced settings. Others are in your face a bit, and it's a bit. Well, it does point to the fact that TTN in general is professionalizing. LoRaWAN is also professionalizing, maturing. So on one hand, it's expected, but I believe that we, in general, the community, also TTI, we need to make an effort to make this simpler, because complicated or doesn't really mean also more advanced features don't necessarily mean that the basic use cases need to be complicated. We just need to keep improving on the simpler use cases or the simpler paths for people to get in quickly. Because this low barrier of entry was the key, in my opinion, to TTN's growth. People could just start doing something with close to no knowledge about what was happening. This was
I think that's a very good point. And I thought I'd just quickly open the V3 console to demonstrate. But yeah, indeed, there is a lot of additional settings that we need to pre-fill.
I see here in the chat, Andres Ramirez, he's saying the log output is really useful. But if I interpret this correctly, on version 3, the logout with the live data displays so much data that it's very difficult actually seeing what's going on. Whereas on version 2, you only saw the necessary, this is uplink, this is downlink, and it was very clear what's going on. On version 3, even I that understand what's going on, this is way too much. Like it needs to be dumbed down a little bit for people to be able to use it actually. Yeah, you see, even Remco agrees. He says the gateway traffic is unusable. I agree. On version 2, it's perfect. It's the perfect balance. Whereas on version 3, it's just too much.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is worth getting into, and I think it would make sense to either start a GitHub discussion or a forum thread about this, on how we can simplify or filter. But actually, filtering is already something we're looking into. And yeah, I think it's partly because we as a company are maturing, and the market is maturing, but also, like there have been, back in the days, there was just one LoRaWAN version and that was it, and you had to use it. And now, because we're a few years in, you have kind of this basic version, but you have LoRaWAN 1.1, and you have now LoRaWAN 1.04 and 1.03 that are all slightly different and use different MAC commands. And if you configure kind of the device with incorrect version, then there's can be a misalignment and MAC commands don't get through, and the device can become unresponsive at some point.
That's one of the big problems I'm facing. Registering a ABP device on version 3 never works for me. I've tried a couple of times. I've never been able to register a device using ABP. Whereas on version 2, it just works magically. But on version 3, with all the different RX windows and different frequencies that you need to manually add, and you need to add them when you register the device. You can't go and change it afterwards. And even following the guides that Hilke wrote on the forum, even if you follow that word for word, ABP has never worked for me on version 3. I see Jacques says it is possible. I'm sure it must be possible, but if I can't even get it right, that a newcomer will never be able to get it right.
Okay, so I guess for time reasons, but I think this is a valid point. So I think we should follow up on it. So I can create a forum thread where throw in some ideas. So look at the Things Network forum, maybe today or otherwise on Monday, and then we can discuss this topic more in detail. So thanks for adding that. And well, it's not a good reason. So I say for sure you're right. We always prefer using OTAA. And if this is a reason why people don't use ABP, I don't know if that's the right reason.
That's actually an interesting topic now. So if I migrate the device from version 2 to version 3, if we step back a couple of years, when we migrated devices from version 1 to version 2, the easy way of doing it was you take your OTAA device, you switch it to ABP, and you copy the session keys over, and then it just worked. From version 2 to version 3, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And it's something that Gonzalo said, like, according to what we as a community saw in the documentation, it is not possible to migrate sessions. So we are forced to go out in the field and restart our devices to force them to rejoin the network. But Laurens, you said that's not true.
Yeah, so there have been a few developments on our end, and I have 2 slides. It's not too clear yet, but I promise you will. We're actually in the middle of updating our document to clarify this, because since the last update, let me see my screen now. Yeah. So since the last update, which is version 3.12, we now also enable session migration. Thing is, it's not really recommended, but it is possible. And I think before you start migrating, I think there are actually some things you have to ask yourself. So first is, where are you migrating from and where are you migrating to? I think for most of the community, this is pretty clear because you're using But basically, here where you're migrating from, there are two options. So either use the Things Network v2 or use the Things Industries v2. Well, let's assume you're using the Things Network v2 now, but then you migrate to a different version. So that's the Things Stack. And actually, I just showed you this whole overview of all the Things Stack deployments. So keep that in mind, that you don't go blindly for the one or the other, but you kind of think about, okay, what's the best thing for my use case? And if it's a community project, then for sure this community edition is something. If there's a reason when you're Switzerland, then you might need to get in touch with Gonzalo and see if you need to migrate to the Things Stack deployment. If you're running a big commercial project, then we say, hey, like maybe better not go to the community version, because you might want to have a version with support and SLA. So at least keep that in mind when migrating, before migrating. And then actually the big question is, are you connected to Packet Broker? And that's both the network you're migrating from and the network you're migrating to. And for the Things Network v2, that is connected to Packet Broker, and the Things Stack Community Edition, that's also connected to Packet Broker. So that already gives you some insight. But here comes actually the big issue. So we do have a way how you migrate end devices, but because it's a new network, the Things Stack has a different net ID than the Things Network v2. So if you import the devices with their existing sessions, meaning with the device address and the session keys to the Things Stack, then you can never use Packet Broker, because Packet Broker thinks you're connected. Your devices are connected to the v2 environment and not to the v3 and not to the Things Stack. So the Packet Broker can then never know where to send those messages to. And that's kind of the reason, or that's one of the reasons why we say go for a rejoin, because then you get a new device address, and then you can also make use of Packet Broker, because then Packet Broker knows where to direct that message to. So that's one thing. And some more reasons why we say let your devices rejoin is because we have a different RX window. So we move to 5 seconds instead of 1 second. Also because our stack became more complicated, and there are also some additional levels, including the Packet Broker. We actually are not always in time for the downlink to receive within this 1 second time window. It not always receives that device. Definitely if the gateway has some kind of slow connection. So that means that you cannot make use of downlinks, and the device also becomes unresponsive for Mac commands. So that being said,
one question, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
With one question, is it possible to not use is there any possibility to make a device use, for instance, the European cluster and not the Packet Broker? So does that even work? Or because when you say, are you connected to Packet Broker, that the you in that sentence is the cluster, right?
Oh yeah, indeed, the cluster it is. Yeah, so, yeah, correct. Yeah. And
it's actually more the gateway. Is the gateway that's giving you coverage, is that gateway using the Packet Broker?
Yeah.
To get the data to your instance or not?
Yeah.
So it's the gateway using a cluster that is using the Packet Broker.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. So, and then finally, if you for some reason still think if there's really no way to let your devices rejoin, then you can migrate with existing sessions. But because you cannot make use of Packet Broker because of this device address that I just tried to explain, you have to migrate the gateways at the same time as you're migrating the devices. Because if the devices are on the Things Stack, but the gateways are still connected to the v2 environment, then your devices will not reach your the Things Stack environment, because the gateway doesn't know basically where your messages belong, because they still use a device address that's connected to v2. So if you would like to still migrate your devices, then it's important that the gateways are first connected before you can move forward with migrating your devices with their existing sessions. Does that make a bit of sense? I tried even drawing it out a little bit.
So the solution here is to let your gateways forward to both version 2 and version 3.
That would be ideal, but let me first try to explain
my
this.
Question now, my question for the things industries, which is Jan's talking, which is not here now, can't we put a layer in front of version 2 that captures all the gateway traffic? That layer is already there. It handles basically the basic station, all different protocols. Can't that layer forward traffic directly to version 3 rather than via the packet broker? So duplicate all traffic. So it's already duplicating all traffic, but it's sending it via the packet broker to version 3. Scrap the packet broker out of that equation, just forward the traffic directly to both version 2 and version 3, and that will solve a lot of the community's problems.
So I think this is something where we need to involve Johan in, but the kind of the size that we're talking about, it's quite big. Oh, nice, Johan. So that would save me a lot of hassle, so Johan can explain it himself. Welcome, Johan.
Hey, do you hear me?
Yes, hi, Johan.
Oh, hey, I just finished my own session on Packet Broker, so I only missed the whole context, but I only got your question or your proposal to route all the traffic both to V2 and V3 at the same time. The reason why we don't do that is because it's a lot of traffic. I think we're only for the European region we already look at 400 messages per second, and it's just too much load to fire that also at V3. It's very costly to do that, and also it's asking for trouble because we cannot guarantee that the same device is not in V2 and V3 at the same time. So it's also asking for conflicts. So that's why we don't enable that.
Is that enough answer to you, JP? I think you directly know how to reach Johan, and for sure we have a forum discussion as a result, but I think I had this conversation with Johan already multiple times, so I don't think there's really a lot of room for to enable that. But maybe to go back with this slide, this migration, this is kind of still work in progress. So again, in our documentation once it's final, but this is basically the process you can look at. So, well, assuming you're all using the ThingsNet v2. So the first question is, are you able to let your devices perform a rejoin? If yes, then actually you don't really have an issue, and then you have a very seamless migration path. So, but first, let's assume your device can rejoin. Can you update your gateways as well? Yes. Well, then you have like the best migration path possible. So you migrate your devices without active sessions, and you simply initiate a rejoin. And your devices then rejoin using the gateways connected to V2. And then you can coordinate with your local community on when to migrate your gateways over to the Things stack. In case you can let your devices perform a rejoin, but you're not able to perform a gateway, well, basically you can follow the same process. And somewhere in the future, we will take down V2. So, but you will have a bit of flexibility here in time, but you somehow still need to manage or to find a way to update the gateways. Then we have a more challenging approach. So what if there's really no way possible to let your devices perform a rejoin, but you are able to let your but you are able to update your gateways? Then that's kind of the story where what I just highlighted. Then you have to migrate your gateways first, and then in some occasions we allow you to also migrate your devices with their active sessions. And then important there is that as I mentioned, there are some risks involved, like downlink windows and not having a way to make use of packet broker. And if you're not able to let your devices rejoin and you have no way of updating gateways, then you have to really look at this process again and try finding yourself or together with the community a way to at least find a way to update your gateways. So this process is still work in progress. So we'll be soon on documentation once finalized. So I don't know if you have anything to add there, Johan?
No, we have already quite some documentation. I know also that we are finalizing some more documentation on this. Yeah.
Right. Let's see. I think I saw some questions coming up. So maybe is there anything, JP or Gonzalo, you wanna add to this?
I just want to spotlight Jack's question. Like, can we, you ask on our side, can we just redirect V2 to V3 for gateway to be migrated at the NS level at some point?
Yeah, at some point we will. Yeah, at some point we will. So when we shut down V2, we will automatically route everything to V3 for everything that's still out there.
Cool.
And at that point, the high traffic levels won't be a problem.
Hopefully not. So this is for the gateways. What I just said. If whether we also route the old V2 device address blocks to V3 as well, that will depend also on how much traffic there still is on V2. But at the moment, it is not feasible to do that.
Yeah, because we talk about, what is it? Total that receives, that packet are received by packet broker, then we talk about in total.
Yeah, about 800 per second now, and we try to, but it's also, by nature how LoRaWAN works. Also, the whole idea of over-the-air activation is that you get a device address for a particular network server, and conceptually V2 and V3 are two different networks. It's just that we try to make the migration process as easy as possible, but also security-wise and operations-wise, and also by how LoRaWAN works. We cannot just smoothly move devices from V2 to V3 without intervention. The only thing that we can do is make it easier, and we start with documentation, and maybe we also come up with some smart tools to make the migration process even easier. But yeah, it's a bit rough on the edges, and it's also not the most convenient thing to do and to ask for. But I'm sure that the benefit of everyone switching to V3 is worth it.
Perfect. So I think to answer the last question from Hugo, update your gateway. With that, we mean basically in essence, updating the server address. So updating from the endpoint of the Things Network V2 to the new endpoint of the Things stack that you're using.
Yeah, but it is also a great opportunity to update the gateway firmware anyway, because if that gateway has been out there for 5 years, you may also want to just check if there are any updates available for your gateway. Best would be also to see if there is basic station support for the gateway. So if the gateway vendor made basic station support for the gateway available, because that's a more secure and a better protocol that we can also remotely configure compared to UDP.
Perfect. So thanks for adding that. So as everyone who is still in this meeting, I would warmly invite you to join our next conference, which is specifically about the Things stack, and this whole migration will be a very big topic. So we really guide you and give you all the different scenarios. So click the link that I just shared and sign up. There's even a free sign up option for the community. So make sure you use that option. Any last words from JP, from Gonzalo? All right, great. So thanks a lot mainly Jeppe and Gonzalo for sharing your thoughts on this session with the community. So as promised, I'll follow up with a forum discussion. So I'll have that ready. At least make sure that you look at the forum on Monday, so we can continue the discussion there. I think Jeppe and Gonzalo, you're also an active forum member, and always also you can use the Things Network Slack. So there's always a way to reach out. Thanks a lot for your contribution, and good luck with preparing the migration.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all for joining.
Bye-bye.